We can go ahead and begin. Welcome everybody to today's event, a panel on walkable places and how zoning can help get us there. My name is Natalie Punzak, and I'm a legal fellow with Desegregate Connecticut, and I'm excited to welcome you all here today. Today's event is co-sponsored by Connecticut Main Street Center, and you'll be hearing more about them from Kimberly, Parsons, Whitaker later on in today's panel. So, as many of you know, Desegregate Connecticut is a coalition of pro-homes neighbors and nonprofits. We're focused on zoning reform at the local and state level because we believe that better zoning laws can lead to a more sustainable and equitable Connecticut. Our coalition is made up of 81 organizational members representing a cross-section of civic and cultural life in Connecticut and economic development and advocacy groups. And I think the breadth of the many missions that are represented by our coalition allies, from environmental organizations and advocates to groups focused on education and promoting safe streets, helps demonstrate both the urgent need and the potential impact that statewide zoning reform law can have in Connecticut. So today's conversation is going to be about walkable neighborhoods, and I want to offer just a quick overview on what exactly that looks like. The basic concept of a walkable community is that small-scale housing development is allowed within a short walk of commercial areas. West Hartford, Middletown, and Greenwich are examples of just a couple of walkable communities in Connecticut. And though we often tend to think of these in urban environments, there are lots of things that urban, suburban, and rural communities alike can do to help promote walkable neighborhoods. We know that Connecticut residents want more walkable neighborhoods. A report from Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging found that consistent across age groups, more than 40% of Connecticut adults would like to someday live in a walkable area with shops and restaurants. So this is really popular and has the potential to improve quality of life and economic development across the state. And so now I'm just going to share a quick video from our website that features residents and community leaders and business owners sharing the value and some of the things that they love about their own walkable communities. So let's hope this works.
I wish we could build kind of houses and commerce right next to each other so people could walk to school, people walk to the store.
It's good for the city because it will help all any economic around here, all the business. People walk, people come to enjoy the life.
It allows people that freedom. It allows them to feel included in a community.
For me to walk from the front door of my house to the front door of my job is 13 minutes. And in between there, I walk through a large city park and I walk by our train station.
We want to make communities where people want to move and people want to live and people want to work and people want to go out to dinner. That's where wealth is generated.
My daughter Madeline and I walked here today, right? It took 20 minutes to walk downtown. Everything we do that adds to a walkable community improves people's physical health, the health of our environment, and the dynamism of the community.
Oh, let's see if I can get to the next slide, the real test. So just as an FYI, Desegregate Connecticut and our coalition partners are focused on a couple of legislative proposals for this legislative session that will help enable walkable communities. And this session really focused on allowing transit-oriented zoning and reforming minimum lot sizes. There are detailed issue briefs on both of these topics, which you can find on our website. Just a 2-second overview of each one of those. Our proposal for transit-oriented communities would let towns choose how they want to allow more as-of-right housing within a 10-minute walk of a train or fast track station with an overall average of 15 homes per acre. And This is legislation that has recently been passed in one of our neighboring states, Massachusetts, and has had a lot of bipartisan support. And so we're excited about the potential of bringing this to Connecticut. And this proposal would also require that 10% of new developments in these transit-oriented communities would allow for deed-restricted affordable housing, and there would be no parking requirements. And we also want to reform minimum lot sizes in Connecticut, because right now 81% of Connecticut's residential land requires 1 acre or more per home, which is a huge impediment to housing development and choice in our state. And so we would like to see towns reduce their minimum lot size to 1/8 of an acre, which would allow for more housing development in areas where sewer and water infrastructure would be able to accommodate it. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our panel. I'm briefly just going to introduce each panelist by name, and I'll provide more detailed introductions for each of them before their subsequent presentations. We'll first have Kai Ade from Safe Streets Coalition of New Haven, followed by Anna Duragazi, who's the Associate State Director for Advocacy and Outreach at AARP Connecticut, and then Kimberly Parsons Whitaker of Connecticut Main Street Center will share more about the benefits and importance of accessible downtown developments. So first we'll have Kai. Kai Ade believes in creating livable and sustainable cities through building an equitable and usable transportation system. Following through on this belief, she organizes with Safe Streets Coalition of New Haven, a diverse coalition advocating for safe, accessible, and sustainable transportation in New Haven. She also works as a program director at the Bradley Street Bicycle Co-op, working to get more people on bikes in and around New Haven. So I'll just stop sharing my screen so she can switch over to her presentation and take it away.
Thank you, Natalie. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I'm going to be talking about walkability and zoning from the New Haven perspective. I'm from the Safe Streets Coalition of New Haven. We're a group of residents, people who ride the bus, people who walk around, and we advocate for a just, safe, accessible, and sustainable transportation system in New Haven. And so I'm not a transportation expert or a zoning expert, but I work with a really passionate group of residents and advocates who want to make our city the best it can be, and zoning is a really important part of that solution. So we really want city in New Haven and the greater New Haven area. We want everyone who lives here from in every neighborhood to be able to travel without a car anywhere they need to go. So some of the things that we care about, why we exist, is that we have a transportation crisis, multiple crises. There's environmental and public health issues, crisis of racial and economic inequality in New Haven, and there's a lot of really, there's public safety issues in New Haven. So a safe and accessible and sustainable transportation system is critical in addressing all of these problems in New Haven, and that cities across the world are grappling with. We need to reduce the reliance on cars in cities so that we can reduce emissions and pollution. We need to make sure that people can get to work, can get to school without having to invest in a car. And we need to make sure that people can walk or bike to work or take the bus without getting hit by cars. And so what makes our city more walkable is also going to make it more bikeable, busable, and livable. So kind of the inverse of everything that I've just mentioned, but walkability is good for health. It's good for economic equality. It's important for safety. If you have a walkable neighborhood, people are going to be able to be outside, out on the roads, out in open spaces safely. And there's also a huge intangible benefit, being able to be around your neighbors, building the social fabric of a community. And, walkable places are beautiful places. You can connect with nature, connect with your neighbors outside. So New Haven is semi-walkable. 12% of people walk to work in New Haven, which is really high. I walk to work in New Haven. It's geographically small. It's got a dense downtown and some really dense residential neighborhoods that are mixed use. So this is a picture of Orange Street, which is right in the middle of a residential neighborhood, but there's a little grocery store, there's a coffee shop, there's a liquor store, and people can walk to those facilities, sit down, spend time with their family, and then, walk back home. And we have parks throughout the city that people are able to walk or bike to really easily, and we have a pretty decent sidewalk network. So there are a lot of sidewalks, and that really makes it easy for people to walk around. Some of the less walkable things in New Haven, and I don't know if this video is going to work, but I'm going to try, is there are some like really wide, scary roads. This is Ella T. Grasso Boulevard. This is Kimberly Ave, this picture. So this video, you can see there's quite a few lanes. There's not a sidewalk on the other side. It's really hard to cross. And around New Haven, there's a lot of traffic and congestion and a lot of missing infrastructure. So the sidewalks might not be ADA compliant, or might be broken, or might be just not there. We're missing crosswalks, we're missing pedestrian signal heads. You can't get across the road easily. There's excessive parking, wide roads, and just sometimes a lot of distance between places. And so that makes it less walkable. So for improving walkability in New Haven, particularly the things that Safe Streets is really thinking about is kind of these 4 different criteria, but the compactness, which is reducing parking and continuing to add density in New Haven, making sure that the roads are safe, and so that's slowing speeds of cars and then reducing the amount of cars on the road. So you can slow speeds through road diets, 1 to 2-way road conversions, adding bike lanes, and you can reduce the amount of cars on the road also by reducing lanes and making sure that people can take other modes of transit to get where they need to go. So that could be biking, that can be improving public transit. And then we want to make sure that you can actually walk, right? So that means you have to have sidewalks that are usable, and then you have to have access to public transit so that you don't have to rely on a car when you do need to take longer trips. And then the last piece is making sure it's physically enticing. And so that's, beautiful spaces, green spaces, pleasant to be on. There's this larger movement of slow streets and open streets. We've had some really great night markets and street closures, public art on roads that helps add to the beauty of these spaces and makes them somewhere people want to be. So similarly, for improving walkability anywhere, these are some of the things that you can do. And some of this is what you can address very clearly with zoning, but removing and reducing parking, making sure you have mixed use neighborhoods, smaller lot sizes. You can increase density by having, accessible dwelling units, just infilling within the existing lots and areas. You want to have, for safety, traffic calming, raised crosswalks and intersections, road diets. And then you can encourage mode shift by requiring developers, rather than like adding parking lots or having parking requirements, thinking about bike racks or allowing for chargers for light electric vehicles, like e-bikes or e-scooters. And then making sure that you have a sidewalk network, access to public transit, right? Being able to build residential areas near transit centers, having the pedestrian infrastructure, signal heads, and crosswalks that you need. And then just making it beautiful. So thinking about trees, shade, flora, fauna, art, and reducing congestion, because most people don't like, honking cars and the emissions from cars. Thank you. I will pass it back.
Thank you, Kai. And now we are going to turn to Anna. Anna Doragazi is the Associate State Director for Advocacy and Outreach at AARP Connecticut. In that role, she advocates for policies and practices that support family caregivers, ensure that people have access to adequate healthcare, and create more livable communities and help people choose how they live as they age.
Great, thank you so much. Let me find the right PowerPoint here. All right. So as Natalie mentioned, I'm Anna Dorgazi. I'm the Associate State Director for Advocacy and Outreach at AARP Connecticut. Our mission at AARP is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. And livable communities is a really important part of that work. So at AARP, when we talk about livable communities, we're talking about creating great places for people of all ages. So if you make changes that make it easier and safer for an 8-year-old to ride their bike in your community, you've probably also made changes that are great for an 80-year-old who wants to go for a walk in their community. If you make your streets and your sidewalks and your downtowns more accessible to a person in a wheelchair, you've made it more accessible to a parent with a stroller. So there's so many changes that we can make in our communities that really benefit people of all abilities and across the lifespan. So our livable communities work really is focused on supporting communities and local leaders to think differently about housing, transportation, and public spaces, all for the sake of creating these great places to live. So why do we need to do this? Why do we need to think about livable communities and aging together? For one thing, we are on the precipice of a completely unprecedented demographic shift. So we're about a little more than 10 years away from older adults outnumbering children for the first time ever in US history. Not only are we going to have a higher percentage of older adults relative to children under the age of 18, but we're just going to have bigger numbers of older adults. In Connecticut, this is already the case. So we have the 7th oldest population in the nation. Almost a quarter of residents are over the age of 60. And we see increasingly high numbers of older adults, particularly in rural communities, which can pose a lot of challenges when it comes to access. So none of this is bad news. I think sometimes people get really scared about this idea of a phrase I hate, but the silver tsunami. So like, what are we going to do when we have this much older population? And it's not bad. We just need to rethink everything from healthcare to property tax to our built environment. And in this process of rethinking, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to what older adults say that they want in their communities. And what older adults want, for the most part, is what people of all ages want. So almost everyone, 96% of older adults say that they want to stay physically healthy as they age. There are a lot of components to this, but we know that exercise is a huge component of physical health. We know that being able to be involved in your community, having that emotional well-being and those social connections also play a big role in your physical health. And we know that having communities where people can get outside and interact with each other plays into all of that. 81% of older adults say that if they need some kind of long-term care as they age, they want that care to be in their own homes instead of in assisted living facilities or nursing homes. So then if you look at the number of folks, almost everyone wants to stay in their homes. And when you ask them, what's going to allow you to do that? The number one thing they say is having the ability to go where they need to go independently. And then next, staying in your own home as you get older, so much of that is contingent on this ability to go places. So whether this is going to the grocery store, going to your doctor's appointments, staying involved, in your synagogue or your church community, or whatever it is that gets you out of bed and keeps you engaged, people need to be able to do that. Older adults want safe streets. If you say, what are important features in your community, they'll tell you, I want my streets to be safe. I want to be able to leave the house and have that independence without getting hurt. And in recent years, we've seen more and more older adults taking trips by bike and taking trips on foot. So older adults make up about 14% of all walking trips nationwide as of 2017. And this is great. And this is all an indication that older adults want to be outside. They want to be active. They want to, be walking and biking. And this could all be good news, but older adults are overrepresented in fatalities in many states, including Connecticut. So in the past 10 years, we've seen increases in both the number of older adults who are killed as both cyclists and pedestrians, and also the percentage of older adults who are represented in overall numbers of fatalities. So I don't think any of this comes as a surprise to older adults themselves, because when you ask older adults, what is it like to be a pedestrian? What is it like to be a cyclist? What are the barriers to you participating in these activities? They'll let you know. And for the most part, older adults, when they think about biking, they're worried that there is too much heavy traffic and too many cars in the street. When they're the reasons for not walking more in their communities, they're concerned that there's not enough light, especially at night. And again, concerns around heavy traffic and too many cars. And when people don't feel comfortable biking in their communities, when they don't feel comfortable walking in their communities, they're not as active. So this figure on the right here, 75%, this is Connecticut specific data from last year, 75% of residents got any physical activity in the last month. That means a full quarter of older adults in Connecticut are not hitting the bare minimum of what the CDC would consider physical activity in the last month. The health consequences for this are tremendous, but also how happy older adults feel is impacted by this. So an important part, again, of involving older adults, in terms of, how do we fix this? How do we address this? Involving older adults in the conversations about safety and designing more livable communities is incredibly important. This is a great campaign. All of these pictures feature AARP volunteers. I'm so proud of that. But this is a campaign that we did last year with Connecticut DOT and Walk For Me CT. And we asked older adults, what do you want other people to know? The folks that you might encounter on the road, what message do you want them to hear? And these are some of the things that they came up with. They said, we don't feel well represented in pedestrian safety campaigns. So show us, let us use our words to educate members of the public. We also did focus groups with some of our volunteers and asked, how do you feel as a pedestrian? What worries you? And they had a lot to say about things like the timing of walk lights and curb cuts, the distance between crosswalks and communities. And interestingly, for folks who are interested in bike infrastructure, they also said, as drivers, they don't have a lot of comfort and familiarity with some of the bike markings and infrastructure that they see in their communities. So we have a lot of work to do to keep older adults out on the roads and feeling safe and engaged. So, what else can we do about all this? If you have ideas in your own communities, AARP's Livable Communities team has something called a community challenge grant that they offer every year. That grant is open and accepting applications right now. I would encourage folks, if you represent a municipality or a nonprofit organization, to visit our website at down there, aarp.org/community challenge for some information about that grant. We have a lot of resources available at aarp.org if you're interested in doing a walk audit, if you're interested in getting quick guides to help cyclists understand the rules of the road. We have so many tools available. And I think the one that I wanted to highlight for today's conversation in particular, we have a handbook for improved communities that looks at how land use and zoning changes can be implemented in communities to make them more livable and more walkable. Some of the pieces that are highlighted in this particular resource talk about streetscapes. So what can we do to encourage on-street parking and road diets and complete streets and communities? There's a section in there on building forms and uses. So a lot of these, I love this kind of overlaps very nicely with everything that Kai was saying. Can we have houses in walking distance to downtown areas? Can we have more, mixed use and multifamily developments that are close to the places where people want to go? And can we have, I think Kai used the word enticing, but how can we make sure that, there's appeal to what our streets look like? But can we also, end minimum parking rules and make sure that we have setbacks that aren't, too close to the road and aren't too far away? So there's a lot of great stuff in this handbook for improved neighborhoods for folks who really want to dig in to how zoning codes in particular can have an impact on walkability. For more information, aarp.org/livable has so many wonderful resources. I highly recommend checking them out. They are the real experts. I'm just doing my best to share their information. AARP Connecticut volunteers offer a free virtual program for community members that we call Road to Livability, that talks about what communities and also what individuals can do in their personal homes and in the communities to make it easier to age in place. And then that is me on Twitter and my email address. And thank you so much for the chance to be here today.
Thanks, Anna. And I think it's really great for us to hear and remember that the things that are desirable and safe and healthy for seniors are the same things that are desirable and safe and healthy for all of us universally. And before I introduce Kimberly, I just wanted to say that we'll be taking questions and answers from the audience at the end of the panel. And so if there's anything that you think of for our panelists that you want to ask, you can send me a message in the chat. Okay, so Kimberly Parsons Whitaker is the interim CEO of Connecticut Main Street Center, the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. Since 2000, she's been a key figure in the planning, development, and evolution of Connecticut Main Street Center to an award-winning statewide economic and community development organization. Okay, so Kim, take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me get this up here. Excellent. I'll apologize in advance because my dog evidently just saw a plastic bag floating down the sidewalk in front of our house. So he's erupted in a great deal of barking, but we're all used to that, aren't we? Thank you. I am delighted to join this panel today, as well as co-sponsoring this event. As Natalie said in her introduction, Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. Our mission is to assess, to educate, to convene, and to advocate to develop and grow downtowns and main streets. And our network of over 80 Connecticut communities includes main streets of all sizes, from our small village centers to traditional New England town centers, to our urban downtowns and mixed-use neighborhoods. Connecticut Main Street Center believes that these 6 components, place, economic vitality, stewardship, inclusiveness, sustainability, and connectivity, are necessary for a truly vibrant mixed-use places. The elements listed within each of these 6 bubbles are necessary in order to attract residents, visitors, businesses, and investors. In short, Main Street retail and restaurants and small businesses won't thrive without people living within walking distance. And people won't stroll and shop and dine without a sense of place. Clean and attractive, safe and walkable, with interesting storefronts and visual elements that encourage you to continue walking. And the healthiest communities are those where the community is engaged in determining the future, those that are inclusive and welcoming, and where the environment is a priority and development is appropriate to the setting. When we think about walkable main streets, we may have a variety of images in mind, some from your own communities. On Main Street in downtown Manchester, there are mixed-use multi-story buildings, retail on the ground floor, office and/or residential above, wide sidewalks, you can see it here in this picture, both on-street and off-street parking. And the off-street parking in downtown Manchester is behind the buildings that front Main Street. And downtown Manchester has a lively program of events and outdoor dining established, especially during the pandemic. Speaking of pandemic, one of the few silver linings of this pandemic has been the ability for communities and neighborhoods to create outdoor living rooms on neighborhood streets so people can safely gather and dine. This section of Dyckman Street in Upper Manhattan has been transformed into just that kind of place. More locally, the Town Green District in New Haven, which is in downtown, has an impressive program of creating more pedestrian-friendly environments. During COVID, the Town Green District developed the Promenade program. So on the photo on the left, that's College Street. This was a partial street closure. So one lane was shut down and became a sidewalk, the Rainbow Walkway. The sidewalk and the parking lane were used for outdoor dining. And more parking and loading zones were created on the opposite side of College Street. On the photo, on the photo on the lower right, that's Orange Street, the Orange Street Promenade. This was a full street closure. Now this is seasonal. The property owner on Orange Street owns all of these buildings on Orange Street. So a highly unusual situation in a downtown. But he requested this closure, and he holds the seasonal city permit on behalf of his retail tenants. And Town Green District manages the space with the property owner. And then this rendering is of a mixed-use transit-oriented development on New Park Avenue in West Hartford. It's a project of the West Hartford Housing Authority. 540 New Park is currently being constructed. It's within easy walking distance of CT Fast Track. 41 of the 54 apartments will be available to occupants with incomes 60% or less of the area median income. So it's a high percentage of affordable units on New Park. Now, New Park Avenue is an area that is not at all walkable today. However, it is in transition from an industrial zone to a mixed use zone. So the town of West Hartford is working to make this very auto-oriented corridor a complete street with pedestrian and bike-friendly infrastructure and several examples of affordable residential and mixed-use development. So a few years ago, we were all obsessed with what millennials want. But it turns out that lots of people at all stages of life want what Main Streets have to offer. Main Streets are walkable, transit bountiful, mixed use, and diverse communities that can address these many issues at once. And these types of communities have shown to weather economic downturns far better than single-use communities, creating a win-win for young people, boomers, and local economies. So when we talk about transit-oriented development, it's been talked about a lot lately, but just let's go back to a definition of this. Reconnecting America defines it as a type of development that includes a mixture of housing, office, retail, and other amenities integrated into a walkable neighborhood and located within a half-mile of quality public transportation. TOD has historically occurred in areas where transit service has converged with downtown or neighborhood level development. In many cases, this may be small-scale TOD. In Connecticut, this transit-oriented development is ideal for neighborhoods adjacent to CT Fast Track and the Metro North stations. TOD and walkability are linked and mutually reliant. The benefits of transit-oriented development. There are a number of them, very quickly. Living near and utilizing transit is far less expensive than owning a car and driving. TOD can help lower transportation costs for a household, allowing the household to spend more on other expenditures like housing and food, clothing, education, or savings. TOD offers additional housing choices and options. If planned correctly, there'll be a variety of housing choices, from market rate to affordable, from studios to multi-bedroom, from condos to rentals. And having more residents and employees take transit will decrease driving, thereby improving air quality both locally and regionally. Locating more housing and jobs closer to transit will have a direct financial benefits in terms of added ridership and revenue to CT Transit and Metro North. And transit-oriented development also creates space for local and regional economic development projects. And many companies are looking to locate their offices closer to transit because that's what their employees are looking for. And it makes economical sense since large employees don't have to pay for as much parking if they're located closer to transit. Subsidizing a transit pass is far less expensive than building and maintaining large parking lots or garages. So a few examples here in Connecticut, and I love the examples my two predecessors in this panel. So I'm going to add a few here. In downtown New Britain, developer Avner Crone of Jasco Development is bringing New Britain's mixed-use buildings back to life. He's currently on his 7th mixed-use project in downtown New Britain. The Raphael building, which was redeveloped a few years ago, is next door to City Hall and just steps from the CT Fast Track station. The interior apartments on the 2nd and 3rd floors are high quality and highlight the architectural elements in the building. On the ground floor, there is 14,000 square feet of retail space, which hosts 56 jobs and produces over 4.5 million in sales every year. Based on the economic impact calculator created for Connecticut Main Street Center, the conservative impact of 16 new residential units in the heart of a downtown translates to over $30,000 annually in local spending per household. A few years ago, Connecticut Main Street Center engaged a consultant to help us calculate the value embedded in our downtowns, and the results were really staggering to us. We wanted to know what the potential impact would be if this space was fully developed appropriately for unique main streets in Connecticut. We calculated that there's a collective 187 million square feet of vacant and underutilized space locked in Connecticut's main streets. We found that filling these spaces with housing, retail, and dining would generate $1 billion in annual tax revenue. It would create 88,000 new housing units and 20,800 ground floor businesses. And that all of that development would create over 200,000 new construction jobs and 215,000 new permanent jobs. For us, these numbers mean hope. They mean a reason for young people and empty nesters to stay here in Connecticut. They mean health and vibrancy and things to do, and they mean jobs and prosperity. Now, there are several questions that may be applicable to all communities and things each community can start to look at to support development around transit. And here are a few of them. How can we look differently at station areas as critical for future development? Well, if people are going to and coming from work via transit, what type of development is logical? Obviously, residential options, we've talked about that, goods and services, restaurants, markets that feature prepared food, and more. Question number 2, how is our zoning set up? Is it flexible enough to allow for development around transit? Does it regulate form as well as use? Talking about form-based codes, and there's a lot on Desegregate Connecticut's website about this, but form-based codes address the relationship between building facades and the public realm, the form and mass of buildings in relation to one another, and the scale and types of streets and blocks. In Connecticut, there are a number of municipalities that have adopted form-based codes, including Canton, Hartford, Simsbury, Windsor, and Hampden. And then the third question, are there short-term public improvements that could be made to better connect people to these assets? So enlivening connections and making the public realm inviting and safe. This is what this is all about. Tactical urbanism is a really effective way to do this. It is defined as an approach to neighborhood building using short-term, low-cost, and scalable projects intended to catalyze long-term change. In short, this is about people-centered decisions about our public realm. It includes design, but tactical urbanism is really focused on how the public realm belongs to people. It's about short-term and inexpensive tactics that invite the community to create safe and inviting places for people. A local example, once again, I'm featuring New Britain a lot these in this presentation, but a local example is on Jubilee Street in the East End of New Britain. This was a few years ago now. This tactical urbanism / placemaking example was a project of the Capital Region Council of Governments and the City of New Britain. So neighbors, as well as city officials, gathered to paint this stretch of Jubilee Street in the distinctive honeycomb pattern of New Britain, sending a visual cue that this is a neighborhood, people-oriented place. Placemaking is a way to improve the ground floor of a community. That's the streets, the sidewalks, parks, buildings, and other public spaces, so that they invite greater interaction between people and foster healthier, more social, and more economically viable communities. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back to you, Natalie.
Thank you. And so I have a couple of questions as the moderator before we open it up to any audience questions. And again, you can send me a message in the chat with any questions you might have for our panelists. But I was wondering if you could start first with offering any suggestions that either local officials in Connecticut cities or towns or residents can advocate for, that are actions that their towns can start taking to make their own communities more walkable. And Kai, maybe you can share some examples of, through the advocacy of your organization, some smaller changes that you've seen in New Haven.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the most exciting things that has come out recently out of this last session that we helped advocate for was being able to lower speed limits in your town. And so that's one thing that residents can now work with their city to actually lower the speed limits in their town on residential streets down to 20 miles per hour. One thing that we are hoping to continue pushing for in New Haven, and that I encourage all of you to push for in your towns, is to remove parking minimums and maybe even hopefully replace them with parking maximums, because that is something that is going to really make sure that we can get rid of kind of excessive parking spaces and really use the and the space that we have in our cities and our towns for people instead of cars.
And Kim, do you want to share maybe some ideas that residents can take away that they can advocate for in their own towns?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kai really hit the nail on the head. It's about prioritizing people over cars. This is not to eliminate cars. Cars are here to stay. This is the United States. Car culture is very much part of who we are, but it's about prioritizing people over cars. When you plan for and encourage walkable places, you encourage people to interact, to gather, to share. And so if you're prioritizing people over cars, people have a voice in decisions that are being made, in the design aspect of creating the public realm. Again, the tactical urbanism thing is a great way for people to be involved. And in all of the cases that I showed, and that was just, a small handful of them, tactical urbanism happens with people within the community. This is not a top-down decision. It really grows from the ground up. And so we've seen great examples in our state and in other places of pop-up gardens and parking spaces converted to outdoor dining parklets. Every September, I think it's around the 21st of September, is International Parking Day. And that's where you can adopt a parking space in a community, a city or town that participates in this. You sort of a group can rent the space for a day and just build an outdoor living room. So it's really kind of the fun aspect of advocating on the local level.
Yeah, and I'll also put a plug in for anything that is slowing car traffic. Just especially for older adults, as we age, our bodies become a little less resilient, a little less able to sort of take the trauma that would come from being hit by a car. And that's part of the reason why we see so many fatalities amongst older adults who are pedestrians. It's not necessarily the case that they get hit more often, but when they do, the injuries are more serious and more likely to be fatal. So whether it's tactical urbanism strategies to narrow lanes and slow traffic, or whether it's a town coming together to decide to lower the speed limit throughout municipally controlled roads, anything that does that is going to make a big difference for older adults who are out, not just on foot, but who are in cars as well. Older adults are also more vulnerable to deaths as drivers when they're in a car accident. So it's just good across the board.
Yeah, I think talking too about streets is really important because, as we know, so much of the infrastructure of our cities and towns is not going to change super dramatically, at least when it comes to the size and scale of our streets in the future. And because walkable communities really evolve over time too, I think it'd be maybe could you share a couple of like just the go-to examples of street slowing mechanisms and how we can help residents and communities start to reframe the way that they think about potential change in their neighborhoods as a positive and a win for them as drivers and as pedestrians, because people are often both.
I mean, I'll jump in with something really simple. We have a real lack of street trees in areas, certainly in downtown areas, not every town, but we can use more of them. And I know that there's tree trimming and elimination of trees that happens for safety reasons or for utility reasons, utility company reasons, but just making sure there's a robust program of street trees. And New Haven has an entire street tree plan, which is just awesome. But street trees not only create a more inviting space visually, they're good for the environment. They lower the average temperature if you're in a heavy asphalt or hard surface area. And they actually have been shown to reduce traffic speeds where you have, and it makes total sense. If you visualize this, if you have an open expansive highway, you're just innately going to drive a whole lot faster. Where you have street trees and you have other visual cues that make a place inviting, that automatically begins to slow traffic down.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that having trees and having beautiful parklets, medians, rain gardens, bumping out curbs and adding rain gardens is something that has kind of that dual benefit of making a place beautiful and slowing down traffic. And one thing I'd add, which is very relevant in the New Haven context, but across cities in Connecticut, cities and towns, is 1 to 2 way conversions. So if you have a one-way street and you convert it to 2 ways, you're slowing down traffic. You're actually making it easier for people in cars to get around. They don't have to do these weird loops. You're reducing the amount people have to drive. And because you're essentially narrowing the lanes by creating 2 different lanes, you are slowing down traffic, making it more walkable and making it more accessible for people in cars as well. So that's a really great, simple, right? You don't even have to change, you just have to put some paint on the road. That's a really great way to increase the walkability of a neighborhood, and it's not really, I don't know, there's no zero-sum game there. It's a net benefit for everyone.
Yeah, and I'll second the restoration of 2-way streets for all the reasons that Kai said, but also for business reasons. If you're trying to make the business case in your community, you're doubling the amount of people who are going to see your storefronts and can interact with your spaces in that way. In addition to that, just anything that's limiting your lanes, whether it's boulevarding, whether it's those tactical urbanism strategies, but it's going to make such a difference, and it's going to make it easier for older adults and anyone to cross your streets safely. If it doesn't feel like a sprint across 4 lanes, if you can walk nicely across 2 lanes, that's going to make a big difference when it comes to safety.
We have a question about tactical urbanism from one of our participants who's asking that in some of the projects or examples that we've seen, who is responsible for maintenance, whether it's a municipality or private developer, because if there is not a sustainable budget in place for upkeep year round, there often can be an intended benefit for the community that ends up being missed or forgone.
Yeah, the excellent question, because maintenance is always got to be factored in, whether it's street trees and flowers or striping or anything else. The beauty of tactical urbanism is that it is intended to be short term. It is intended to be temporary. And at the same time that it's a quick hit intended to be temporary, it also starts to prep people and leaders psychologically for more permanent change. So Jubilee Street in New Britain, the one with the honeycomb pattern, I've not been there recently, but I would venture to guess that it hasn't been kept up, because you can paint a street and as soon as you have a winter storm, it starts to break down. But I think that that's the whole point with tactical urbanism. These are intended to be short term that lead into a discussion about longer term changes.
Yeah, and I think, if you're looking for a project like that to become a catalyst for a more permanent change, I'd really pay attention to is there data to collect from that? Is there, how can you document the impact of the intervention and make the case for whatever investment it's going to take to make that, permanent or more stable or better maintained moving forward? Because I think, at the end of the day, and all the conversations that I have with policymakers, that's what they want to know. They want to know, if we have any level of financial investment or, of the millions of projects that we could prioritize, why this one? And if you can come to the table with a really good case for, why this one, you're going to have better success in the long run.
Another participant question is about mass transit. So CT Fast Track and Metro North stations are obviously super beneficial and serve the communities that are directly adjacent to those services. But there are still over 100 of Connecticut's 169 municipalities that don't have nearby mass transit. And so how can some of these communities work to implement mass transit, or even some of these ideas that we associate with transit-oriented communities in their towns and cities that are farther away?
Yeah, I mean, there are many communities that have bus lines, either local, regional bus lines. And while transit often leaves the bus program out of the conversation, that's the reality in many local communities. Now, in order for people to be encouraged to take the bus, let's be honest, they have to be reliable. Their routes have to be understood. You have to understand how to utilize them, both the scheduling. I mean, in addition to being reliable, they have to run often enough. So this is an advocacy issue, very definitely, for people that may be, for well-intentioned, but don't have the good fortune to be on any of these major transit lines. It's what can we do to provide alternatives to driving in your car that's inexpensive, safe, reliable, easily understood for people. We as a nation, and Connecticut more so than a lot of places in the Northeast, we have incentivized the car for decades. And so this requires a change in attitude, very definitely, on the leadership level, a change in attitude. But on the grassroots level, It's sort of pushing for that change in attitude so that people who want to make choices, whether it's walking, biking, taking the bus, it's let's change our attitude about what we're incentivizing, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I think also make it easier to prioritize some of the things that are less exciting. Like it's easy to get people mobilized and excited about, a big change, something that's going to be very visual, something that's going to be, kind of Instagrammable. And those are really important. But, when I talk to AARP members and volunteers and say, what's the barrier for you taking the bus or using the transportation available in your community? 80% of the time, it's sidewalks and lighting. So there might be a beautiful new, bus station or connection to other forms of transit that are, could be walking distance from someone's house. But, for people of any age, walking a mile on the side of a 4-lane highway with no sidewalks, it doesn't matter if it's 200 feet or 10 miles. You're not gonna, if you don't feel safe traversing that distance, you're not gonna do it, and that splashy new bus shelter won't be used. And then that fits into this bigger narrative of, well, we made the investment in transit and nobody used it. Well, because you didn't make just a little bit more investment to help people connect to that big investment.
Yeah, I will just echo sidewalks. So important. Not only that you have them, but that they are not cracked, that they are not broken, that you can actually smoothly walk across them, that they're ADA compliant, that you have ramps to cross the street. Making sure that you have that connected sidewalk network is critical for walkable places, for being able to access public transit, just for everything.
Yeah, and that they're shoveled in the winter. And that you also shovel the spot where you can get on the bus. I can't tell you how many snowbanks I've had to throw strollers over trying to use public transit in the Hartford area, and chucking my kids over big snowbanks. It's not fun, and it's an accessibility issue, and it's a deterrent for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think in so much of this work, it is always so important to reframe the way that these are both personal and potentially easily attainable things that we can start to change in our communities. So we have just a couple of minutes left. And so I think that I am going to wrap things up to make sure that we are out of here by 1. And I first just want to thank our speakers today for their time and their insight. And again, thank Connecticut Main Street Center for co-sponsoring today's event. We have several upcoming events in the coming weeks, which I encourage you to check out at our website with the /events, including a Pro Homes rally for our 2022 Connecticut legislative season. And that will be on the fund date of 2/22/22. So links to register for all of our events are on that site. And if today's event got you excited about making your own communities and neighborhoods more walkable, I encourage you to visit our website, desegregate.ct.org/be-the-change. And there you'll find various playbooks that are catered towards audiences as your role as an advocate, land use commissioner, or a board candidate in support of Pro Homes policies to make your own town and Connecticut as a whole more walkable and welcoming. Our Connecticut's legislative session kicks off tomorrow, so stay tuned for ways that you can help advocate for zoning reform this year by joining our email list. There's a link to sign up for that on our website, and I think we will be putting that in the chat as well. And you can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at DesegregateCT on each of those. And so again, thank you all today for attending, and thank you again to our panelists, and that's it.